My name is Emma, and I never thought my life could get any more complicated. That was until I met James. I've always been pretty independent, especially after everything that happened with my family. But when I met James, he was different. He was charming, kind, and treated me like I mattered. He made me feel special in ways I didn't know I needed. After a year of dealing with emotional trauma from my parents, the last thing I expected was to fall for someone. But I did. It wasn't long before we got serious. But there was something unsettling about James. It wasn't his kindness or the way he supported me. It was how possessive he could get, how controlling he could be at times. It started small. Little comments here and there, suggestions that seemed innocent at first, but over time, they began to feel more like demands. It all started when James invited my estranged parents to my house, without telling me. Let me explain. My parents and I had a complicated relationship, to say the least. Ever since I turned 18, they'd been nothing but toxic and manipulative. My mom made me homeless on my 18th birthday. I was kicked out of the house with nothing but a suitcase and the clothes on my back. To say we didn't have a relationship after that would be an understatement. I went no contact with them as soon as I could, and I was just beginning to rebuild my life and my trust in people. So when James invited my parents over, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't understand why he would do that. Why would he bring people into my life who had caused me so much pain? I hadn't spoken to my parents in years. The thought of seeing them again, especially at my own home, made my skin crawl. When I found out about it, I was furious. I tried to explain to James how wrong it was. I told him how hurt I felt, how unsafe it made me feel, but he just brushed it off. He said it was a nice gesture and that it would be good for us to reconnect. To him, it was no big deal. But to me, it felt like a violation of everything I'd worked so hard for. That night, I broke up with him. It wasn't an easy decision, but I couldn't be with someone who didn't understand my boundaries. I needed someone who respected me and my past, not someone who was willing to disregard everything I'd been through just to play mediator with my toxic family. James didn't take it well. He became aggressive, telling me that I was overreacting and that I needed to give them a chance. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. They had hurt me too much. And I wasn't willing to let them back into my life, not even for James. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. James started showing up at my apartment uninvited, texting me constantly and calling me over and over again. He wouldn't leave me alone. He told me he was sorry and that he just wanted another chance to make things right. But I knew better than to fall for his manipulation. It wasn't about making things right for me. It was about controlling me, about convincing me that I needed him. One day, things went too far. He showed up at my work. I had to leave early because I couldn't concentrate with him lurking around. It wasn't just the constant contact anymore. It was the fear. I felt trapped, and no matter where I went, it felt like he was always there waiting. That's when I decided I had to take action. I filed a restraining order against James. I had to protect myself, even if it meant making things more difficult. I wasn't sure if it would stop him, but I had to try. The next day, I got the call. James had been arrested for violating the restraining order. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me felt guilty. It didn't feel good to see someone I once cared about in trouble, but it was necessary. I needed to move on with my life, and he was standing in my way. At first, I thought the hardest part was over, but then I met John. The night James invited my parents over, I was speechless. My heart was pounding in my chest, my head spinning with confusion and anger. I walked into the living room to find my mom and dad sitting there, acting like everything was fine. They had no idea how much this was messing with me, how seeing them again after everything would tear open old wounds I had tried so hard to close. I stood frozen in the doorway, feeling my skin go cold. My mother, with that calm, fake smile, said, "We've missed you, Emma. It's time for us to fix things." Fix things? After what they did to me? After kicking me out and pretending I didn't exist? My eyes locked on James, standing casually by the door. His hands in his pockets like this was just another normal visit. But to me, it was anything but normal. I didn't know how to react. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to fight, but I didn't know how. And then it hit me, the weight of the betrayal. James had invited them here without even consulting me. He knew my history with them, knew how much it hurt, yet he still chose to push me into a situation where I had no control. My gut twisted in anger. I turned around, my fists clenched, ready to walk out. But James stepped in front of me, blocking the door. "Emma," he said softly, his voice steady, "you need to hear them out. This is important." I could feel the rage bubbling up in my throat. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to scream at him to leave me alone. But all I could do was look at him, wide-eyed, as if this were some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I spat, trying to push past him. "Nada," but he stood firm. "You need to try, Emma." "For me," he insisted. That was when the anger finally overtook me. I pushed him hard, shoving his chest with all the strength I could muster, and he stumbled back. It wasn't enough. I kicked him in the groin, and he fell to the floor, groaning. I didn't even feel guilty. I had to get out of there. I ran for the door, and when I finally stepped outside, I could breathe again. I slammed the door behind me and bolted to my car, the engine roaring to life as I sped away. My hands were shaking, my vision blurred with tears I couldn't hold back anymore. But I didn't stop. I just drove. For hours, I didn't answer the phone. James kept calling, over and over, each missed call only adding to the pressure building in my chest. I needed space. I needed to be alone, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him forever. Finally, after a dozen missed calls, I pulled over on the side of the road. My hands were shaking, my heart still racing. But I answered, "Emma, please." His voice cracked with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought it would be good for you. You deserve to have your family back in your life." His words hit me like a slap. The manipulation was clear now. He wasn't apologizing for violating my boundaries. He was apologizing because he thought I should be grateful for what he did, for forcing me into a situation that I wasn't ready for. I felt a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "James," I said, my voice cold, "I don't need you to fix my life. I don't need you to fix my relationship with them. You've crossed a line, and I don't think you understand that." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing heavily, and for a moment, I almost felt bad for him. Almost. "I know. I messed up," he said, his tone softer. "But I'll make it right. I swear, Emma. Just don't shut me out. Please. I love you." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure if I loved him anymore. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let him drag me back into the mess of my family. I'd made it this far without them, and I wasn't going to let him ruin that. "I need space, James," I finally said, and hung up the phone. I sat in my car, staring blankly at the road ahead. The tears had stopped, but the weight of everything was heavy. My relationship with James was changing. I wasn't sure what it would look like moving forward, but something had shifted that night. I could feel it deep in my bones. As I drove home, my mind raced. I wasn't just fighting for my sanity now. I was fighting for my independence. I had already lost so much in the past. I wasn't about to lose myself too. When I got home, the last thing I expected was to find my parents sitting on my couch. But there they were, waiting. Like nothing had happened. "James, what the hell is this?" My voice came out shaky, but I couldn't hold back anymore. The frustration, the anger, the confusion, it all crashed down on me like a tidal wave. He didn't seem fazed. He just stood there, blocking the door, his expression soft and pleading. "Emma, please, just talk to them. They're your parents. They want to make things right." I shook my head in disbelief. My parents hadn't wanted to make things right. If they had, they would have never done what they did to me. I could still feel the sting of that day, the shock of being told to leave, like I wasn't even their daughter anymore. They had cast me aside, and now James was trying to force me back into that toxic mess. "No, James," I said, my voice growing stronger. "You don't get it. They destroyed me. They ruined my life. You have no idea what they put me through. And now you're telling me I need to just forgive them? You really think I'm going to open that door again?" James looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe concern, maybe guilt, maybe something darker I didn't want to see. But he wasn't backing down. "I'm just asking you to try," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think you're wrong about them. They've changed." "Changed?" My laugh was bitter, filled with disbelief. Are you serious? Do you think I'm that stupid? His face flushed, but he didn't move. Instead, he took a step closer, lowering his voice as if trying to be calm, trying to reason with me. Look, I get that you're hurt, but I really think you should give them another chance. If you can't do it for yourself, do it for me. Something inside me snapped. The idea that he was trying to manipulate me, to pressure me into this for his own sake, made my blood boil. He had no right to ask me to put my emotional well-being on the line for him. I'm not doing this, James, I said, my heart racing. You can't make me. You don't know what it's like. You don't know them. He stepped forward again, blocking my way, his tone turning more forceful. I don't care what your past was, Emma. This is about your future. If you can't let go of the past, you'll never move on. You'll never be happy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him how wrong he was, how little he understood. But before I could say anything, something else struck me. He had been talking to my father behind my back. I hadn't realized it until recently, when I went through his phone one night, my hands shaking as I saw the messages between James and my dad. James, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. Why were you talking to my father? His expression froze like a deer caught in headlights. For a moment, he didn't say anything, but then he shrugged as if it were nothing. I just thought I could help him. He's a good man, Emma. He made mistakes, but people change. People change? I repeated, my breath catching in my throat. You really think he's changed after everything? You think he's a good man now? His gaze faltered, and I could see a hint of defensiveness creeping into his features. Yes, Emma, I do. And if you don't believe that, then you're the one who's wrong. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the man I had trusted, the man I had opened up to about my past, and now he was defending the very people who had destroyed me. I felt the room close in on me. My body shook with fury, my hands trembling. I felt trapped, cornered. My heart was pounding in my chest. You don't get it, I said through gritted teeth, trying to keep my voice steady. You don't know them, James. You don't know what they're capable of. You don't understand what they've done. He didn't answer me. Instead, he just looked at me, and in that moment, I realized how deeply different we were. I had lived through hell with my parents, but he was so caught up in some fantasy of redemption that he couldn't see the damage they had caused. He wasn't going to listen, and I knew I was never going to change his mind. But what hurt the most wasn't his refusal to understand. It was the betrayal. The fact that he had kept this from me, the secret messages with my father, the pressure he'd been putting on me for weeks. It was all too much. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't breathe in this space with him. I turned on my heel, ready to leave. But before I could make it to the door, he reached out and grabbed my arm. Emma, please, don't leave like this. We can work through this together, he pleaded. I looked down at his hand on my arm, and something inside me snapped. Without thinking, I wrenched my arm out of his grip and spun around to face him. Don't you dare touch me again, I spat, my voice breaking through the anger. This is over, James. It's over. And with that, I ran out the door. I took a step back, feeling the walls closing in on me. You don't get it, James. You just don't understand. They've hurt me too many times. I can't pretend it's all okay now because you think they've changed. I've spent my whole life trying to survive their abuse, trying to escape from their manipulation, and now you want me to just forget all that? James stared at me, his face softening. He looked genuinely hurt, but his eyes were determined. I don't want to hurt you, Emma. I just want you to see that people can change. They're not the same people they were before. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like something was squeezing the air out of me. It was suffocating. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. This wasn't the man I had fallen for. The man I loved wasn't supposed to be someone who made me feel like I was the one who was wrong for not forgiving my parents, for not letting them back into my life. I felt betrayed by his insistence, by the way he was pushing me to do something I wasn't ready for, something I could never do. Why are you doing this? I demanded, my voice shaking. Why are you trying to make me go back to them? You've seen what they did to me. You know the truth. You can't just ignore it and pretend everything's fine. You can't tell me what to do with my life, James. I'm not your project. I'm not your responsibility to fix. He stepped closer again, his voice now almost pleading. I'm not trying to fix you, Emma. I think you're missing a chance to heal. I think you're closing yourself off from something that could make you feel whole again. I stepped back, shaking my head. I don't need them, James. I don't need you telling me how to live my life. I'm fine on my own. I'm surviving, and that's enough. For a moment, everything felt frozen. The silence between us felt heavy, suffocating. Then, just as I was about to turn away and walk out, I noticed something on his face, something that made my stomach twist. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't remorse. It was something darker. And in that moment, I realized I had made a huge mistake trusting him. Without warning, I spun around and bolted for the door, my heart pounding. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck in that room, with him blocking my escape, with my parents sitting there like nothing had ever happened. But before I could reach the door, James grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward him. Emma, please don't leave, he begged. We can work through this. Just talk to them. You owe them that.
There's been a few days when I've seen
I wrenched my arm free, the force of my anger giving me strength. I don't owe them anything, I snapped, my voice cold and final. And I don't owe you anything either. I ran out of the house and slammed the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was shaking all over, but I had no time to think about what had just happened. I had to get away. I stumbled to my car, my hands still trembling as I fumbled for the keys. I could feel my chest tightening, and all I wanted was to drive. Drive far away. Drive until I could think clearly, until I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating. I started the engine, slamming the gear shift into drive, my eyes stinging with tears I didn't want to shed. My mind was racing, but all I could focus on was getting away from James, from the house, from the suffocating pressure of the situation. But as soon as I pulled onto the road, my phone rang. I didn't want to pick it up. I didn't want to talk to him, not now. But it rang again, and again, and again. After about a dozen missed calls, I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking as I finally answered. Emma, James's voice came through, softer now, almost regretful. Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to push you like that. I just wanted you to give them a chance. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was helping. I stared at the phone, numb, unable to process the emotions swirling inside me. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he truly cared and was just misguided. But the other part of me, the part that had spent years protecting myself from people who had done me harm, knew better. He hadn't been trying to help. He had been trying to control me. I can't do this anymore, James, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You've crossed a line, and I don't think I can trust you anymore. I need space. I need to figure this out on my own. I hung up the phone, my hands still shaking. I drove off again, not knowing where I was going, just needing to be away from it all. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, that something even darker was looming ahead. James took another step closer, his hand reaching out as if to touch my arm, but I recoiled instinctively. I couldn't let him touch me. Not like this. Not after everything he had pushed me into. My body was shaking, not from fear, but from anger. From the overwhelming realization that I had trusted the wrong person. Emma, please. I cut him off, holding up a hand. No, James, just stop. I turned to face my parents. My mother's cold eyes met mine, and for a brief second I felt the familiar pang of guilt. The thought that maybe, just maybe, I could forgive them. That I could let the past go and rebuild something, anything with them. But then I remembered. I remembered everything. The lies, the manipulation, the way they threw me out like I meant nothing. I had spent years fighting to rebuild my life, to find my own worth again. I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all James or my parents, tear that down. You need to leave, I said to my parents, my voice steady now, even if my heart was racing. I've tried to make peace with you both, but I can't do this anymore. Not now, not ever. And James, I turned to face him, my eyes locking with his. He looked hurt, but there was something else there too. Frustration, anger. His jaw was clenched, and I could tell he was fighting back his own emotions. But this wasn't about him. This was about me, and I had to make that clear. James, I need space. I need to heal on my own. I'm sorry, but you don't get to tell me what's best for me. You don't get to fix me, and you don't get to bring people back into my life who hurt me. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just stood there, his face unreadable, like he was processing what I had said. The silence was deafening, and for the first time I felt truly alone, alone in the way I had always feared. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry, yes, but I was strong. I had come so far on my own, and I wasn't going to let anyone, including James, take that away from me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, James sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I just wanted to help you, Emma. But I see now, I've pushed you too far. Yeah, you have, I said softly, more to myself than to him. You've pushed me too far, James. He turned and walked toward the door without saying another word. I watched him leave, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing in my mind. The moment the door clicked shut, I felt the weight of everything fall away. The tension in my body melted, and I felt free. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I stood there for a few minutes, processing everything that had just happened. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the pressure, but also the clarity. I had made the right decision. I had set boundaries, and I had stood firm in protecting myself, and that in itself was a victory. As I stood there in the quiet of my living room, I realized something important, something I had forgotten over the years of pain. I was enough. I didn't need to fix my past. I didn't need my parents' approval or James's validation. I was stronger than I had ever known. I was free to make my own choices, to rebuild my life on my own terms, and that was exactly what I was going to do.